of all the issues in this campaign, there isn't any one that's more important in how to get the citizenry involved in shaping the agenda, so they don't just become spectators and watch a panorama of major candidates and their advanced people go through one town and state after another without having an input. The reason why I say this is that the biggest redirections in our country are being ignored by Obama and McCain. The first one, of course, is the war in Iraq, and none of them have a real plan to withdraw from Iraq the way the Nader Gonzalez ticket has. The second one is the many thousands of Americans who die every year because they can't afford health insurance, and we need universal health insurance, but we need full Medicare for everyone, not some complex cockamamie scheme that McCain or Obama has to keep the health insurance giants in charge of who gets health care and who doesn't. And the third is the enormous waste of taxpayer dollars in Washington, starting with the bloated, wasteful military budget, going throughout the government, which is completely out of control because the government now is outsourcing half of its functions to other large corporations that aren't at all accountable and that can't be diselected or whose contracts can't even be publicly analyzed. We see that with Halliburton, we see that with KBR in Iraq, we see that time and time again in Washington. And if we have that kind of waste and that diversion of the federal government, the billions of dollars are not going to come back into repairing cities like New York, the sewage treatment plants, the bridges, the highways, mass transit, the libraries, schools, and clinics, what we call the public works and public facilities for the well-being of the people. And because that money is not coming back home, good jobs, good paying jobs are not being created, the kind of jobs that cannot be exported to China. The Nader Gonzalez ticket is getting ready for its ballot access drive here in New York State. We fully expect to be on the ballot as I was in 2000, 2004 here in New York State. And from that, we are going to build, after Election Day, Congress watchdog groups in as many congressional districts here and around the country as we possibly can. Because unless the people, in effect, take control back of Congress from the corporations, all of these problems that we have been discussing will continue to fester and continue to worsen. That's really the pivot. Congress is the cockpit of the federal government. It's the most important branch of government. It controls the money. It controls all kinds of authority. And if the people take control from their congressional district of the Congress, that means that the federal government will come around, and that means that there'll be a major effort to bring the state governments around. So that's why we call our campaign 0809. Matt Gonzalez, my running mate, civil rights lawyer in California, and me. We can have any questions you'd like.
Ralph, have you been contacted by either the Obama campaign or any other political party about working with them after elections?
No, Barack Obama has been stiffing me for almost 2 years now. I have been asking him starting in 2007 for a meeting at his Senate office, and somehow he never has time. Even one time I gave him 3 months leeway to get an appointment. That's not a good sign. John McCain did meet with me in May 2004. John Kerry did meet with me in May 2004. So we're gonna try again. I'm going to be sending a letter to both McCain and Obama to see if we can get together and at least come forward to the American people, along with Bob Barr of the Libertarian Party, with certain positions forward-looking that we all agree on. And I think some of them are on the table and we can possibly agree on. I think all of us have something in the Patriot Act that we think needs to be changed. I think campaign finance, there are a lot of things that we possibly could agree on.
I want to know about about your major initiatives to transfer wealth in this country from this corporate plutocracy that we have going on now to the American public, to the middle class America? What is your major initiative that you see that will redistribute this wealth?
Well, right now the returns on capital are much larger than the returns on labor, and unfortunately, the tax on labor is higher, considerably higher than the tax on capital. For example, capital gains are taxed at 15%, dividends are taxed at 15%, but labor is taxed up to 38%. And that's got to be reversed. So we do need progressive taxation in name and reality, not just in theory. And we need to reverse the taxation so that the tax on labor is not higher than the tax on capital. But I have a much more fundamental proposal, and that is that our tax system be based on one principle, which is we tax first that which society likes the least or dislikes the most before we tax human labor or the necessities of life. So therefore, we should start taxing the $500 trillion this year of security derivative transactions in Wall Street. Very, very tiny tax, can raise huge amount of money when you're dealing with $500 trillion as the base. We should tax gambling, we should tax the addictive industries, we should tax pollution, like a carbon tax, we should tax corporate crime. We should tax things that we don't like and that we want to reduce and diminish before we tax labor and necessities of life. Now, if we do that, easily the first $100,000 of worker income would not be taxed at all by the federal income tax laws. And there would be other money for health care and for building and renovating the public works in communities throughout the country.
Do you have a realistic goal to go beyond 5% this time? How far you think that you can go?
Well, Google is now working with people in Louisiana for a New Orleans debate. They're bypassing the private corporation that we call the Commission on Presidential Debates, which is created and controlled by the Republican Democratic parties. They have now a criteria of 10%. In the last AP poll, Nader Gonzalez came in at 6%, up against Obama and McCain, and we're just getting underway. So we're going to try to move it to the 10% level. If we can't persuade the alternative debate between that's being sponsored by, facilitated rather, by Google, to go down to 5%. Because I think a fair entry-level standard is one of two. Any candidate, assuming there aren't enough states to theoretically qualify to win the presidency, any candidate who registers 5% or more by the polls in September, or the polls have a majority of people who want that candidate on the debate, should be on the presidential debates, or should be on any nationally sponsored debates. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd have all kinds of debates. Little debates, big debates, state debates, regional debates, national debates. Why, in a presidential year with so many momentous issues before us, are we rationing debates? We don't ration weather reports. We don't ration entertainment. We don't ration sports. Are we a rational society that's serious about the future of our children and grandchildren, or aren't we?
Foreign policy question. What is your take on the, should we say, the socialization of Latin America, particularly South America, including Venezuela and Bolivia?
Well, apart from needless rhetoric, the trend in South America is, I think, in the right direction. Natural resources should be controlled by the people of South America, and the popular sovereignty should reassert itself so that corporations and huge plantation owners and mine owners don't run these countries as oligarchies. So we're seeing a cycle here in South America. We've seen it before. It's been reversed. The question is whether it can stay together and represent the interests of the workers and peasants for a change, instead of 50 wealthy families in one country or another allied with the military. So all in all, it's a good trend. I mean, there are differences. Unfortunately, Obrador was not elected, or he was elected, it was stolen from him in Mexico. But all in all, and I've watched South America for many years and traveled through it in the 60s, and I've seen these cycles again and again. It is a healthy development. but it's got to be done in a very smart way in order to be grounded deeply in the power and spirit of the people.
If you became president, are there some political prisoners that you would consider commuting the sentence, like the Cuban Five, Louis, Abu Jamal, Leonard Peltier?
Well, by definition, I don't believe in political prisoners. Political prisoners, by definition, violate the First Amendment and other provisions of our Constitution. It's rather irregular for George W. Bush, who's a recidivist criminal and has violated more constitutional standards than any president in history, is lecturing other countries to release political prisoners when he has so many political prisoners in this country. For example, as of December 2004, the Justice Department had arrested and imprisoned for alleged material aid to terrorist groups 5,000 people in this country. 2 were convicted. The convictions were overturned in Michigan. So John Ashcroft, as of December 4th, 04, was 0 for 5,000. That's the definition of dragnet enforcement that produces political prisoners.
So on that subject of justice, Constitution, I mean, the Bush administration really, I know you're supportive of impeachment or criminal charges. What would you suggest as president to sort of purge the Justice Department of this, blatant disregard for the Constitution?
Well, obviously, those who are left over have to be replaced by any new administration. We don't want little John Ashcrofts running around the Justice Department. The multiple impeachability of Bush and Cheney has been taken off the table by the Democratic leadership in the Congress, which controls the Congress. And this is a very bad precedent for future presidents, number one. And second, the damage that George W. Bush and Dick Cheney have done to this country with a criminal illegal war in Iraq, number one, high crimes and misdemeanor. Systemic torture, number two, high crimes and misdemeanor. Arresting thousands of people and imprisoning them without charges or habeas corpus rights, high crimes and misdemeanor, number three. Spying on thousands of Americans without judicial approval, high crimes and misdemeanor, number four. And 800 signing statements by Bush, a total record in presidential history, where he says, I'll sign this bill that Congress has just enacted, but I'll decide whether to obey it or not, high crimes and misdemeanor, number five. All of these are taken off the table by Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, and Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader in the Senate. That's one reason why we have to break the two-party system and replace it with multiple parties and public funding of public campaigns and instant runoff voting and binding none of the above and getting rid of these obstructions to getting on the ballot by third-party independent candidates that no other Western country would tolerate. No other Western country puts so many barriers in the way of voters and candidates as do the states in the United States of America. And that is an outrage that denies millions of voters their choices of candidates and denies a competitive democracy. Instead, we have a two-party elected dictatorship that has turned the United States government over to giant corporate multinationals who are tearing the heart and soul out of our country. And it's time to stop and reverse the trend and galvanize the people so they can represent the sovereignty of the people and the spirit of the Constitution, which starts with the preamble, we the people, not we the corporation. Yes.
Are you considering lending your support to the New York City citizens' effort to put on the November ballot the creation of an independent 9/11 investigation commission?
It sounds good to me. I mean, I don't know why it's written in a way where there's no budget. It has subpoena power, but there are many unanswered questions. Obviously, all kinds of critics from all sides have said that the 9/11 Commission, starting out with the premise that it wasn't going to name names or hold anybody responsible, I think aborted its promise and potential. And there are just too many questions that haven't been answered. Bush and Cheney, as you know, testified not under oath, and they required the commission members not to take notes in the closed-door session. How's that for budding felonies or promising, you know, whatever. I mean, that's just totally absurd. You can't have an investigative commission which has a closed-door session with 2 major suspects and not have them under oath.
Some people from the Democratic Party think that.
Which party?
Democratic
Yeah.
Party said that 4 years ago, one of the reasons why Al Gore eventually couldn't make it was because you were a third candidate. What would you say to people that tell you again that you could again have a negative impact in the Democratic Party for the presidential election?
Are you still asking that question?
Yeah.
You still don't have an answer? Why don't you ask Al Gore why he isn't president? Because, and I've talked with him, and he would say, one, he won the popular vote, and that should have been enough. But in the United States, you can come in first and not be in the White House because of the Electoral College. And second, he would say that he won it in Florida, but it was stolen from him many, many ways, before, during, and after the election, from Tallahassee to the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court who had no business rendering that decision in the first place and preventing the Florida Supreme Court from completing the statewide recount. Thirdly, I think George W. Bush got more votes from Gore than I did, don't you? Okay, so if we're all equally right in running for election, then we all try to get votes from one another. So either none of us are spoilers or all of us are spoilers. Yes.
One of the major issues
Last
is,
question.
one of the major issues I think facing it is immigration, the immigration policy, whether how it relates to economics and to labor policy here in the States.
Yeah.
What is your position on what you do in terms of immigration reform?
Well, it's too long an answer, but I'm going to try to just give you a short. First, we have to stop, our foreign policy has to stop supporting dictators and oligarchies in Mexico, Central America, South America, which so deprive people of their barest necessity of life, that they're driven north in order to provide food for their family. That's the most important right there, because most people don't want to leave their native land unless they're forced to. And second, the boundaries of the United States have to be controlled because there's too much criminal smuggling, there's infectious diseases, there's pollution both ways, as well as people coming across illegally. So I don't agree with the Wall Street Journal that leans toward open borders because it wants to pull down wages and labor standards here in the U.S. And third, the magnet are these employers like the big meat packers and the poultry processors, and they're the ones that should be the subject of law enforcement. That's quite clear, and they've been getting away with it. And getting away with it because they can push around these frightened people who have no rights and are not here legally, and in effect keep minimum wages and other labor standards down for other minority workers in the United States. Yeah, just one other thing I'd like to say. This presidential campaign should emphasize, and not just Nader Gonzalez, but Obama and McCain, how we are going to crack down on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse with adequate enforcement budgets, prosecutorial resources in the Justice Department, and a strengthening of the corporate crime laws on the federal statute books. Because millions of workers are losing their pensions, investors are losing their savings, workers are losing their jobs, people are losing their health and safety because of a rampant corporate crime wave violating the federal security laws, the environmental laws, the worker safety laws, and the consumer protection laws. And unless a presidential candidate can tell you how that candidate is going to crack down on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, that candidate has in effect signaled that he is going to be a puppet in the White House to his or her corporate paymasters. And if you want to see the detail on our 12-point way to crack down on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse, look at our website, votenader.org. As a matter of fact, we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for people who help us get signatures on petitions to get on the ballot all over the country. And we're looking for contributions because they come cleanly without quid pro quos from individual citizens, since we take no money from commercial interests or PACs. So that the website is votenader.org. Thank you.